Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our introduction webinar for EtherHaul EH8010FX. My name is Shimon Hochbaum. I'm Director of Product Management for Siklu, and I will be your host today. The webinar is scheduled to go for about 1 hour. We will start with a few housekeeping issues, then we'll cover the use cases and features and specifications of the 8010FX. We will follow with a Q&A session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the question tool on your GoToWebinar, and we will monitor the questions as we go. We'll try to answer during the presentation or at the end of the Q&A. So let's start with the highlights of the EH8010FX, and there are basically three things that I would like you to remember as we go along this presentation. First of all, this is today the leading radio performance in the 10 gigabit class with a system gain of 64 dB for 10 gigabit. This is also the only 10 gigabit capable millimeter wave radio with an any media option, giving you the option to connect to the radio with a classic SFP Plus fiber at 10 gigabit with single mode or multi-mode, but also to reuse your Cat6a cable, which might be running already from your basement or data room all the way up to the radio. And this way you do not have to run new cables to leverage the 10 gigabit capacity of the radio. And last but not least, this is also a very attractive street price. We will be continuing with communication in that respect directly with the attendees here. So what are the use cases that we see for this EH8010FX? First and foremost, it's going to be about fiber extension or fiber replacement. So the classic case is you need 10 gigabit of connectivity between two locations. You have maybe two routers, two switches, and you do not have fiber availability in the time frame that you expect. So it's very simple. You can replace your fiber link with two EH8010FX radios, and you achieve the same 10 gigabit fiber-like capacity, and you do not need to wait months or to go through a lot of labor and administrative work to achieve this. So once we understand the basics of where we are going with the 8010FX, we can talk also about some applications. First, so the classic one is obviously connecting maybe a customer to one of your call sites or point of presences in the area, either as the only media going into this building, or in a backup scenario where we may have a critical customer in that served building. They absolutely require redundant path into their building, and getting a second fiber route is probably impossible in many cases, or not very economical, and you can basically provide the same availability as a traditional fiber link going wireless roof to roof. Another potential use case is when you have a larger network going in a ring fashion topology across part of the city between two locations in your core network, or one location, doesn't really matter. So you start with maybe a larger switch or a router in your point of presence, and you start running the ring across a number of sites in the neighborhood, and two locations cannot be connected again with fiber. So you might as well utilize the EtherHaul 8010FX to provide the same level of capacity, 10 gigabit between two locations. So you see here again a ring of sites. At each site you have your typical access switch, and between the two sites where fiber would not be available, you can utilize the 8010FX. And another use case, if you have maybe the same kind of topology rings, but the service that you actually deliver at any location do not exceed a single gigabit. So you can now imagine that in a place where you have two wireless links coming into the building, you can connect the two radios back to each other, utilizing the 10 gigabit ports on the radio, and then drop two services at 1 gigabit each directly to customers in that location. So very practical and simple way to deliver twice 1 gigabit services to maybe the first two customers in a building. And then talking about another application, it's we've been used already to deploying fiber in many cases, but we know that it's not available everywhere. We know that there are maybe skill sets which are not available in every location. Some teams are not yet up to date on the requirements of working with fiber. They might not have the tools available, and in that, or you might have already a Cat6a cable going again from the basement all the way up to the roof. And in that case, why not utilize the 10 gigabit? Why not utilize the cable that you already have available and run the 10 gigabit directly over the copper cable? We have had these kinds of discussions from a number of customers in the past year when we were working on our 10 gigabit links, and we decided to make it very simple, not start looking for SFPs at 10 gigabit with an RJ45 plug, which are generally speaking not hardened for deployment outdoor. And we've built a 10 gigabit copper interface directly into the radio to make it very simple to basically start deploying 10 gigabit anywhere in the network, regardless of the skills or the tools or the fiber, or the cabling available in the building. So let's talk a little more now about the specifications and the features of the radio. So on the radio side itself, we have 64 dB of system gain at 10 gigabit, which is unique in the industry. Will allow, for example, in the Chicago area to deploy almost to 2 kilometers with a 1-foot antenna. So it's not something really challenging. Obviously, one can go a lot further with a 2-foot antenna on both sides. And I said to reach almost 2 kilometers with 3.5 nines of availability. There is just no equipment today on the market which can deliver that kind of performance. We do that with QAM 128 for the 10 gigabit capacity, and there are two non-overlapping channels of 2000 megahertz available on the radio just in software. Nothing needs to change in hardware. All this comes together with adaptive bandwidth coding and modulation, so that in case of rain or similar type of impediments, the radio will start modulating down. We have in this radio up to 9 levels of modulations, which allow boosting the availability of the link by 30 dB, which I believe is also a little bit more than what we've been doing so far with our other radios and what other radios in the 10 gigabit capacity are able to do today. When we look at other aspects of the radio, such as the switching and the management, we have again any wire dual media 10 gigabit port, which means basically that if you look on the face of the radio, if you look on we'll look at it, take a look at it in a moment. If you look at the GUI, you see a single port logically coming out of the radio, and on the outside you are going to see actually two physical ports. One is an SFP plus cage for a single mode fiber or multi-mode fiber depending on the SFP device that you would plug in, and the other one just near it is a traditional looking RJ45. However, it meets 802.3 AN or 10 Gbps standards, which allow to take 10 gigabit over a Cat6a cable up to 100 meters. This same port, which will also allow to do in-band management with VLAN or without VLAN, depending on the practices in your network. Then there is also another RJ45 port on the radio, which is just 1 gigabit in this case, to do, for example, drop and insert or overbuild type of application as we've seen earlier. This 1 gigabit port is also capable of carrying traffic, as we saw in the drop and insert type of scenario. It can also do management with or without VLAN, again, depending on the practices in your organization. And it can also do power over Ethernet. That's one of the power options for the radio. So all this comes together with the very traditional management suite in our EtherHaul radios, the dual and the GUI, which allows looking at two radios, or the two ends of a link on a single screen, CLI, SNMP, syslog, radio, StackAx. All the tools that you would normally expect on the EtherHaul family are available also on this radio. And what you see here on the right is basically how we manage to do all this. So at the core of the radio, we have an Ethernet switch, which is on the one hand connected to the modem and the antenna. On the external side, on the left here, you have the combo port at 10 gigabit and then the 1 gigabit port, and also the controller of the radio is on this switch. So that explains how we have all this flexibility in terms of switching, in terms of management available to the designer and the operators of networks. In terms of software, the 8010FX comes with brand new software, which is release 10, as it should befit 10 gigabit radio. It is based on a very different software architecture that we had so far with all our prior radios, the 600, 500, 700, 5500 type of radios that we had in our portfolio. And therefore, this is a release which will only run on the 8010FX. That's a very clean slate, which will allow us to bring additional features as we go along. However, even though we built a completely new software, as I explained before, we are bringing all the experience that we had with EtherHaul so far in terms of deployment, mechanics. We are going to see that in a moment. General operations, so the same GUI, CLI commands, the MIB, so that from a transition point of view, whoever is already experienced with utilizing EtherHaul will find no challenges in operating the 10 gigabit solution. This comes with a complete package of documentation available on our portal. You can just go to partner.cyclo.com, log in, point to the software download area, and you will find there the complete package, complete support package, for the 8010. So let's review a little more in details the physical ports and power. We start with a power and management port. We have which is the 1 gig, we have a power and management port which is both a DC, regular DC input. Sorry, let's start here from the right. So we have the regular DC input on the right, which is a screw down terminal. Then we have ETH1, which is a 1 gigabit Ethernet copper. And then we have the combo port, which is again an RJ45 and the SFP plus cage. And all the way to the left, you see our traditional auxiliary port, which has the two prongs for the RSSI, which is available both in alignment and in regular mode if you want to check your alignment during the operation of a link. We have also a USB port there, which we will activate in the future. The power draw of the radio is 50 watts, and we have again two power sources into the radio, the DC and the PoE. They can be activated in parallel so that you have a backup power option into the radio for those critical sites. A little bit about the mechanics and the antenna. So first of all, from a mechanical point of view, as is traditional in our EtherHaul family, we build for carrier class. We cover the full temperature range, humidity, and other mechanical requirements, as well as IP67 protection level for the radio. You can see the form factor is somewhat the same, somewhat different from our other radios. It is a little longer, a little thinner for those of you who know the dimensions in detail, but it still looks very much like our existing radios. We had to do some changes to accommodate the 10 gigabit capacity and the requirement of the switching engines. However, we did retain the traditional interfaces that we have on all our accessories. So any of the 1 foot antennas or the 2 feet antennas that you might have, or even some half a foot antenna for those not in the US, because FCC does not allow deployment of half a foot antenna. So all these practices of antenna attachments and alignments are retained, and also the same mounting kits. Not shown here on the picture, but those of you who know, the 2 feet antenna comes with its own integrated mounting kit, so there is no change. And the same interface to a mounting kit that we have on all our radios is also visible here on the back of the ODU with the 4 screw for attachment. Trying to show this now in a picture, you see on the left our traditional 2500 radios mounted on with a 1 foot antenna and the mounting kit, and you see the similar solution now with the 8010FX on the right. So it means basically that if you have 1 gigabit, 2 gigabit, 5 gigabit of capacity and you want to go to 10 gig, all you really need to do is swap the ODU, and there you go, you are now at 10 gigabit of capacity. Nothing else needs to change. So before we close and maybe turn over to the Q&A, I'd like to ask a question here to the audience. One second while I bring the question here. So I'm now placing a poll. Basically, it will allow us to understand what are your expectations in terms of deploying. What are the speeds that you expect to see dominating your network a few months to maybe a year from now? Everybody has different, I would say, practices in designing and operating your network, and would like to see if we calibrate correctly the way we design our products and we make them more useful for the audience that you represent. So we'll take a few more 20 seconds maybe to let everybody respond, and then I'll share the results so that you would all be able to see what's the common understanding here. So, okay, it seems to me that the flow of responses is trickling down. Let me see if I can share with you the result. So it looks as if we have a majority of the audience planning to move to 10 gigabit about a year from now, but the other half of the audience is going to stay somewhere between the 1 and 2 gigabit reach, which is totally understandable. We have a very diverse audience here today, I understand. Thank you very much for your responses. So we are back to our slides, and like to leave you with again something to take out from this webinar before we open the Q&A. Again, we understand that the 8010FX represents really the leading performance with 64 dB of system gain for the 10 gigabit capacity. It is the only radio today in the 10 gigabit class with the traditional option for fiber, but something more interesting and more flexible with an option for 10 gigabit over copper cable as well. And as I said, it comes with a very attractive street price, and we are going to announce a promotion sometime next week around this. So I'm now going to take a pause, look at the questions which were asked so far, wait maybe for a few more to come along, and we'll open the Q&A session. Okay, we have already a few questions here that were asked during the presentation. So I'll start with the first one. Does rain fade affect the reliability of the radio? I would say yes and no. Yes, because rain can affect the performance of millimeter wave transmissions in general. That is a common phenomenon in the E-band, the 7080, as well as in the V-band, the 60 gigahertz. However, we have all these rain effects are very well documented for the last maybe 20 years by a number of organizations, starting with the ITUT and many others. Rain data is available, and that basically allows us and others in the industry to predict with a great degree of accuracy what is going to be the rain density, if you want, along a path along the year. How many minutes are we going to see light rain? How many minutes are we going to see very heavy rain? And basically, if you want to design your network for 2.5 nines, so 99.5% of availability, or if you want to design all the way down to 99.95 or maybe 99% of availability, links can be easily calculated. And let me see if I can bring here an example of how we would do this. So if you go on our website, if there is you can go to LBC link budget calculator, lbc.ciclo.com, and from there you can check basically the performance of a link. So you start here with selecting the radio, the types of antennas, the location where you want the link to be deployed, the distances, either absolute or a range, and push the calculate, and you get here for the different types of availability that you would like to design in your network, the expected performance. One second, I have a technical problem here. One second, please. Sorry. So the question which was asked is this radio similar to the 2500 or to the 5500? And I would say it's on the one hand, obviously it retains, it is closer to the 2500 than to the 5500, for the reason that it is built around a switch this time, so it has multiple ports on the outside, which are all connected to the switch and allows to create very flexible deployment and operating scenarios in terms of both outbound or inbound management, in terms of manipulating VLANs to a large extent. However, it is not as it is just not as flexible as the 2500, because really our intention is to make something which is very simple, very easy to deploy, and to replace fiber. So just like a traditional fiber link between two buildings doesn't do anything, and basically any smarts are first and foremost coming out of the switch, we expect the switch, which is in the same location, we expect the 8010FX to do exactly the same, to be a very good fiber replacement, and to do all what would be necessary in order to manage it, to deploy services where needed, but first and foremost to replace fiber, not to be a very smart switch as we have, for example, on our 2500 like radios. There's a question here which is not directly connected to the 8010FX. Why do we have two types of 2-feet antennas in our portfolio? We have the EHANT 2-feet-M, and we have the EHANT 2-feet-B. The -M and the -B are both 2-feet antennas. They have the same performance in terms of gain, directivity, wind load capabilities, and they are based on a different design. One which is more traditional, a very heavy antenna. One which is a little more advanced, a lighter antenna, but comes together with a side strut to achieve the stability required for E-band links. Different practices. We had the heavier antenna for a long time. We have now moved over to the lighter antenna. Some long-time users, may have some affinity for the older antenna, and we still make it possible to obtain the two antennas from Siklu. However, we are more flexible in terms of lead times with the -B antenna, the newer one. Why do we have fewer ports on the 8010FX compared to the 2500FX? Again, that really has to do with the vision that we have for the deployment of these 8010FX radios. Make it very simple for people who may know about radio or may not know about radio to go with 10 gigabit of capacity where they may not have fiber. So fiber is very simple to deploy from the point of view of operation. We wanted the 8010FX to be also very simple to deploy, and we've built, we believe, the right amount of sophistication in the radio, but we have not gone overboard with things which are probably not going to be used by the majority of our customers. So yes, what is going on in terms of availability and deliveries? The 8010FX has been shipping Since the month of June, we have availability at all the traditional Cyclo distributors. Customers who had placed pre-orders already received their links, and basically it's now business as usual. Question here about the TX power. So the transmit power on the radio is 14 dBm of output power when going for the 10 gigabit capacity and the QAM 128 modulation. We have obviously when we modulate down, we can also transmit a little more power. We'll go all the way up to 19 dBm in the lower modulations. What is the MTBF of this radio? Another question which has come here. So again, this radio is mostly designed around all the practices that we had so far in the EtherHaul family. Our predicted MTBF performance is close to 90 years. In practice in the field, we have seen radios exceeding more than 100 years of MTBF. So we have a high expectation for the field-based reliability of this radio, but for now we just have predicted data, which is 90 years of MTBF. Another question here about the power. Sorry, I was not clear earlier. So we have, let's try to see the ports on the radio. Which are visible on this slide. So here again, you have on the right, the green port is a direct DC connector, 48 volt DC, up to 50 watt of power. And next to it, you have ETH1, which you can use for management, for traffic, but also for PoE power. So some networks prefer to utilize PoE, some networks prefer to utilize DC, and some networks also want to have the option of redundancy in power. So in that case, it is possible to connect the radio simultaneously to direct DC and PoE, and the radio will autonomously switch between the two sources if one of the two would fail. So it's very simple, and there is also basically a power redundancy option in that case. So I think I have addressed most of the questions. I may not have addressed all of them. Sorry about that. But anyways, we are going to make this presentation, the recording and the Q&A session available within a few days on our website. We will send everybody an email with the link to all this information. Thank you very much for joining today and for all these interesting questions. We are going to launch a survey in a moment. Please take half a minute to respond and let us know what else you would like to hear from Cyclo. Thank you very much, and have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye now.